Imagine an environment so just brutally cold that to survive it, a tiny, bright orange berry has to engineer a chemical shield so powerful and so biologically dense that Russian scientists eventually used it to protect cosmonauts from cosmic radiation in space.
Yeah, that really happened.
Right. Whether you're prepping for a meeting or just insanely curious, we've got something incredible for you today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we are exploring the invisible war going on all around us, which is how the natural world deals with extreme cold.
And it really is a war. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a war of chemistry, physics, and just sheer biological will.
Absolutely. So for our mission today, we're synthesizing three amazing sources. We've got a Frontiers in Plant Science review on the molecular basis of freezing plants, an ecological study from Arctic Science tracking permafrost degradation in subarctic Quebec, and an article uncovering the nutritional secrets of the ultra-hardy sea buckthorn plant.
And the overarching theme you'll notice as we, dig into this material is that nature doesn't just passively endure the cold, it actively weaponizes it.
Yeah. It remembers it. And when that cold disappears, nature doesn't just slowly die off. It completely and aggressively rewrites entire ecosystems.
It's wild. So before we can understand how entire Arctic landscapes are changing, we first need to understand how a single plant survives plunging temperatures on a cellular level. Because humans can just put on a coat or walk indoors, right?
Exactly. We have mobility.
Right, but when the temperature drops, a plant just has to sit there and take it.
Right. But to understand how a plant takes it, we really have to define what cold actually means biologically.
Okay.
The research draws a very strict line between two types of stress. So you have chilling stress and freezing stress.
And there's a big difference, right?
A huge difference. Chilling stress is what happens when temperatures drop below 20 degrees Celsius,
Right.
but they stay above zero. Freezing stress was when it actually plunges below 0 degrees.
So chilling stress is basically why my indoor tropical houseplants drop all their leaves if they're like near a drafty window.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because they're adapted to frost-free zones, so anything below room temperature feels like an absolute emergency to them.
Right, exactly.
But temperate plants have to face actual freezing stress. And from what I read in the research, the real danger isn't necessarily the ice itself, at least not at first. The primary danger is to their cell membranes.
Yeah, the plasma membrane is really the front line here. It's the primary site where a plant detects cold stress, and it's also where things go horribly wrong first.
Because a healthy plant cell membrane is a fluid, flexible boundary, right?
Right, it's dynamic. But when temperatures plummet, if the plant isn't prepared, that membrane undergoes a phase change. It shifts from a fluid state into this rigid, semi-crystalline gel.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when it turns into a gel, it essentially freezes up and stops functioning.
Exactly.
If the ion channels break down, it loses its permeability, and the cell just leaks its internal fluids and dies.
That is the literal mechanism of death, yes.
Right.
So the plant's #1 priority is preventing that membrane from turning into a gel.
Yeah.
And the primary tolerance mechanism for this is staggering. The plant fundamentally alters its own lipid composition on the fly.
On the fly.
Yes, it actively removes saturated fatty acids from its membrane and swaps in unsaturated fatty acids.
This is exactly like winterizing a car. The plant is literally swapping out its oil from saturated to unsaturated fats, so its engine doesn't seize up in the cold.
That's a great analogy. Saturated fats, like butter, turn solid in the fridge.
Right.
Unsaturated fats, like olive oil, stay liquid even when it's cold. So the plant is doing a massive metabolic undertaking to make that swap.
That is mind-blowing.
And at the exact same time it's doing this lipid swap, the plant starts manufacturing its own internal antifreeze. The literature calls these osmoprotectants.
Okay, osmoprotect.
Yeah, as the temperature drops, the plant floods its cells with soluble sugars, polyamines, and amino acids like proline.
Wait, I need a quick clarification here. The research mentioned these osmoprotectants regulate osmotic potential. Why does osmotic potential matter when it's freezing? I mean, isn't the plant surrounded by snow and ice? It's not like it's in a desert.
Well, it's a great question because it reveals a super counterintuitive truth about freezing. To a single cell, freezing is actually a severe form of dehydration.
Oh, really?
Yes, because ice is solid, the cell can't use it. When water freezes in the spaces outside the cells, it draws liquid water out from inside the cell.
Oh, wow. So it pulls the moisture right out.
Exactly. So by pumping itself full of these osmoprotectants, like proline, the plant changes the internal chemistry of its cells so they hold on to their water more tightly. It physically lowers the freezing point of the intracellular fluid.
And some plants take this even further with something called supercooling.
Yes, supercooling is fascinating.
The research highlighted apple, peach, and birch trees. Apparently, they somehow managed to keep the water inside their inner tissues in a liquid state, even when the ambient temperature is well below zero.
They do.
They just stubbornly refuse to let lethal ice crystals form inside their core structures.
And all of this, the lipid swapping, the antifreeze production, the supercooling, it's all commanded by a very specific genetic master switch called the ICE1-CBF-EKOR pathway.
That sounds complicated.
It is, but basically when the cell membrane detects the cold, it sends a calcium signal that eventually fires up this genetic pathway, turning on all the genes responsible for these defenses.
But doesn't that take time? Like, if the temperature drops suddenly, doing all this complex genetic and chemical shifting seems like it would be too slow to save the plant.
Well, if the plant were starting from scratch every single time, yeah, it would be way too slow.
Right.
And what's fascinating here is that this introduces one of the most incredible mechanisms in the literature, which is metabolic memory.
Metabolic memory.
Yeah. Plants don't just react in the moment. They actually remember previous cold exposures through epigenetic modifications.
Epigenetic modifications, meaning it's altering how its genes are read. Let's break that down. The research mentioned histones. Are those the little protein spools that the DNA wraps around inside the nucleus?
That is exactly what they are. So picture DNA wrapped tightly around those histone spools. The first time a plant experiences cold stress, it chemically modifies those histones.
Okay.
It slightly unwinds the DNA where those specific cold defense genes are located. And here's the incredible part.
Yeah.
Even after the weather warms up, it leaves the DNA slightly unwound. It retains a literal molecular footprint of the stress.
Oh, wow. So the genetic instruction manual is essentially left open to the emergency cold defense page. It doesn't close the book.
Right. It keeps those defense genes on standby.
That's incredible.
So the next time the temperature drops, the plant doesn't have to go through the entire process of detecting the cold and unwinding the DNA. It deploys its defensive lipids and osmoprotectants vastly faster and just much more aggressively.
So the plant is chemically taking notes. That is wild. And I feel like it perfectly bridges into the next piece of this puzzle.
Definitely.
Because now that we know how plants engineer themselves on a cellular level to survive freezing, let's look at a species that takes this to the absolute extreme.
Oh, the sea buckthorn.
Yes, a real-world master of cold survival, and how its extreme cold weather adaptations directly benefit human health.
It's an incredibly resilient plant. It's this thorny, deciduous shrub found in the Himalayas, Siberia, and coastal regions of Europe.
Also known as the Siberian pineapple, right?
Right, because of its bright, tart orange berries. And this plant doesn't just survive a mild frost. It thrives in environments where temperatures can plunge to negative 43 degrees Celsius.
Negative 43 degrees. I mean, that is a level of cold that just shatters normal biological structures.
It's brutal.
And because it survives in those brutal environments, the plant is an absolute vault of protective compounds. The nutritional profile in the article we reviewed is insane.
It really is.
It has 10 times the vitamin C of an orange, up to 600 milligrams per 100 grams of fruit.
The vitamin C is impressive for sure, but the real secret weapon of the sea buckthorn is the oil found in its seeds and berries.
The omega-7.
Exactly. It produces an exceptionally high volume of a rare essential fatty acid called omega-7, which is also known as palmitoleic acid.
So I have a question about this. Is it exactly because this plant has to endure brutal negative 43-degree winters that it produces such an intense, concentrated payload of antioxidants and oils?
Yes.
Like, are the plant's cellular survival mechanisms from our first source the very things making it a superfood for us?
That is exactly the connection. Extreme environmental stress forces the sea buckthorn to hyperproduce these specific lipids and phytosterols.
Quick pause. Phytosterols, are those basically the plant version of cholesterol?
Very similar, yes. They help regulate the structure and fluidity of the cell membrane.
Okay, got it.
At negative 43 degrees, the sea buckthorn is at severe risk of catastrophic oxidative damage and massive cellular dehydration.
Right, because of the ice pulling the water out.
Exactly. So to survive, it creates this intense, dense shield of omega-7 and vitamin C. That omega-7 is the ultra-fluid, unsaturated fat it uses to keep its membranes from turning into that deadly rigid gel we talked about earlier.
Okay, this is where the connection blows my mind. Because omega-7 is huge in the wellness world right now.
Oh, absolutely.
People use it to heal skin, treat burns, relieve severely dry eyes, and even treat menopausal intimate dryness. It hydrates and protects the mucous membranes in the human body.
It's extremely effective for that.
So is it doing the exact same thing for us that it does for the plant?
That is the direct biological link. Human cell membranes share structural similarities with plant cell membranes.
Wow.
Omega-7 is actually a natural component of human skin and mucous membranes, but it's pretty rare in our diets. When we consume sea buckthorn oil or, apply it to our skin, we are essentially borrowing the plant's extreme cold armor to repair our own cellular barriers.
That is so cool.
The exact lipids the plant synthesizes to prevent its cells from bursting in sub-zero ice are the ones our bodies can subsequently use to rebuild damaged tissues.
And historically, humans figured this out long before they knew what a lipid bilayer was. The ancient Greeks used to feed sea buckthorn branches to their horses to give them shiny coats
That's right.
and to help them recover from battle injuries. The plant's scientific genus name, Hippophae, literally translates to shining horse.
I love that fact, and the modern applications are even more extreme. During the Cold War, the Russian space program did extensive research on this plant.
Oh, right, the cosmic radiation stuff.
Yeah, space is an environment of extreme radiation, and cosmic radiation creates free radicals that literally tear through the lipid bilayers of human cells.
Just shreds them.
Right. And because sea buckthorn evolved to produce such dense protective antioxidants and membrane-stabilizing lipids to survive freezing,
Right.
Russian scientists realized it could actually protect human cells against radiation.
So they used it on the cosmonauts.
They did. They put it in the diets of cosmonauts and formulated a protective cream from its oil.
So a shrub sitting in a frozen Siberian wasteland is quietly manufacturing the exact biochemical shield needed for space travel. It's unbelievable.
It really is.
Yeah.
Later, the Chinese government invested heavily in researching it as well. They actually made sea buckthorn squash the official health drink for their athletes at the 1992 Seoul Olympics.
Just to aid in tissue recovery.
Exactly.
But this raises a huge looming question. We've seen how perfectly these plants like sea buckthorn have adapted to freezing environments. Their entire chemical identity, the reason they're so nutritionally dense and powerful, is based on fighting the cold.
Right.
So what happens when that fundamental environmental baseline, the extreme cold, starts to vanish?
To answer that, we really have to zoom out from the cellular level to the landscape level.
Okay, let's do it.
The research from Arctic Science tracks this exact phenomenon. It's a 90-year chronosequence study of the Tasiapic Valley in Nunavut, Quebec.
And a chronosequence, that's essentially a space for time substitution, right?
Exactly. Researchers study different plots of land side by side that represent different stages of environmental transition, which lets them piece together a 90-year timeline of change without having to actually wait 90 years.
And the backdrop here is rapid warming. Between 1992 and 2012, this specific region warmed by nearly 0.195 degrees Celsius per year.
Yes.
Over 2 decades, that is roughly a 4-degree jump in the mean annual air temperature. For an Arctic ecosystem, that isn't just warming, that is a total shock to the system.
It initiates a total cascade. At the start of this 90-year sequence, what the researchers call the pioneer phase, the landscape is defined by intact permafrost.
Right, the ground is frozen solid.
Right, and is mostly covered by flat, low-lying lichen, moss, and tiny prostrate shrubs that just hug the ground. Because the vegetation is so low, the winter wind just whips across the flat earth, blowing the snow away. The snow cover is extremely thin.
But as that air temperature slowly ticks upward, the ice inside that permafrost begins to melt. And the research describes this leading to thaw settlement.
Yes, thaw settlement.
The ground physically sinks and collapses in places, creating little depressions or hollows.
And that tiny change in topography changes the entire trajectory of the ecosystem. Because those little hollows are now slightly lower and protected from the brutal, scouring wind, slightly taller shrubs like dwarf birch and willow can suddenly take root.
Ah, I see.
And as they grow taller, their branches act like a physical net. They start catching and trapping the wind-drifted snow.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I read this part of the study 3 times because the mechanism is so wild. I always assumed more snow meant a colder ground.
Most people do.
But once the snow gets trapped by these taller shrubs and builds up past 50 centimeters deep, the physics of the snowpack changes entirely.
It does. The weight of the snow and the sharp temperature difference between the frozen air above and the slightly warmer earth below create something called a depth hoar layer at the base of the snowpack.
A depth hoar layer.
Yeah, the snow crystals physically metamorphose into large, cup-shaped crystals that trap huge amounts of air.
It's basically like building an igloo, right? The structure of the depth hoar layer physically traps the latent heat radiating up from the Earth's core. It prevents that heat from escaping into the sub-zero Arctic air.
So that's a perfect analogy. Instead of the snow freezing the ground, the shrubs are essentially using the deep snowpack like a thick down comforter.
Wow!
That layer acts like industrial-grade insulation. The study showed that even when the ambient winter air temperature drops to 20 or 30 degrees below zero, the soil surface under that deep, shrub-trapped snowpack stays right around 0 degrees Celsius.
So, wait. The air might be -30, but because the shrubs trapped the snow, the ground is basically sitting at room temperature relative to the permafrost.
Precisely. And that means they end up baking and melting the permafrost from the top down throughout the entire winter.
So the climate warming only starts the process. The warmer air creates the initial thaw settlement, but after that, the plants completely take over.
Yes.
The vegetation itself becomes the primary driver of the permafrost melting.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the climate warming is just the spark. The plants are terraforming their own environment. They structurally change the landscape to favor their own expansion at the direct expense of the permafrost.
They just hijack the ecosystem.
They do. By the end of this 90-year sequence, the permafrost table has dropped so deep it's unmeasurable. The lichen and moss are completely wiped out, replaced by a dense forest of tall shrubs and black spruce trees.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, wait, I thought melting permafrost was always a doomsday scenario for carbon emissions, you're not alone.
Right. It's a very common assumption.
That is exactly what I thought going into this research. We usually associate melting permafrost purely with destruction and massive carbon releases. We are constantly told it's a climate-ticking time bomb, that it holds thousands of years of dead plant matter, and when it thaws, microbes eat it and release massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the air.
And to be clear, that is the standard permafrost carbon feedback loop, and it is a very real critical concern globally.
Right. But the exact soil measurements from the Taisiapak Valley reveal a highly complex plot twist regarding what happens after the ice melts.
A massive plot twist.
In the early stages of the valley, that original frozen soil had barely any carbon in it.
Right. The researchers referred to that original soil as a cryosol, literally frozen soil. Because of the specific geological history of this area, the cryosol here formed in emerged marine sediments.
Okay.
It only had a tiny 1 centimeter thick organic layer sitting just beneath the moss. It was almost completely devoid of carbon.
But as the permafrost decayed and the tall shrubs and spruce trees took over, the soil didn't just sit there, it evolved into a luvasol.
Yes.
And that organic layer didn't just grow slightly, it expanded to nearly 65 centimeters thick.
The transformation is staggering. The data shows that the soil organic carbon content, or SOC, quadrupled from the early lichen phases to the late shrub-dominated phases.
What?
Yes. As the deciduous shrubs grow, they drop a massive amount of leaf litter. Their complex root systems push deep into the newly thawed earth. When those roots die and decompose, they trap carbon deep underground. The new ecosystem is heavily enriched in carbon.
So what does this all mean? We are constantly told that thawing permafrost releases trapped carbon. But this source says the new forest ecosystem is actually acting as a massive carbon sink. Are we looking at a silver lining here?
Well, it raises an important question about how we view ecosystem transitions. Now, it's vital to clarify that the researchers didn't measure the total ecosystem respiration.
Meaning they didn't measure the carbon escaping into the air.
Right, they didn't measure the exact volume of carbon dioxide escaping as the deep ice initially melted. We don't have the final net zero atmospheric budget for the valley, but what the ground level data definitively shows is nature actively trying to rebalance itself.
It's not just a passive victim of a warming climate?
Not at all. The transition from a barren, frozen plain to a lush, carbon-hoarding forest demonstrates how deeply dynamic and aggressive ecosystem adaptation can be.
That makes total sense.
When we build climate models, we have to account for these massive biological overhauls, not just melting ice. We have to model the aggressive biology of the new ecosystems rushing in to colonize the space.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the natural world.
It really does.
I mean, We started today looking through a microscope at a single plant cell. We explore the microscopic antifreeze of plant cells, swapping out saturated fats for unsaturated oils just to keep its membrane from turning to gel.
A literal chemical battle.
Yeah. And then we discovered why a negative 43-degree environment creates a cosmic radiation-blocking superberry in the sea buckthorn.
Right.
And finally, we watched an entire Arctic landscape engineer its own warming blanket to melt the permafrost and transform a frozen tundra into a carbon-rich forest.
Everything we've discussed is connected by this underlying relentless drive to adapt and survive whatever the environment throws at it.
Exactly. Understanding these deep natural mechanics allows us to look at a simple skincare product or, a news headline about the Arctic with profound new context.
Absolutely.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought based on the source material to just mull over. Earlier, we talked about a plant's metabolic memory,
Right. Epigenetic modifications.
its ability to chemically remember the cold, leaving its DNA slightly unwound to prepare for the next freeze. The cold essentially trains the plant.
It requires that stress.
But if global temperatures continue to rise and environments like the subarctic stop freezing altogether, how long will it take for nature to forget?
That is the million-dollar question.
If resilient survivalist plants like the sea buckthorn no longer have to fight the frost, will they eventually lose the magical nutritional properties that rely entirely on that extreme stress? Think about that the next time you step out into the cold.